Now, let's look at some of the most significant changes for this code review cycle. Each one of them will be addressed in greater detail in one of the classes that follows this introduction. So this overview is just a way to provide you with some context of the changes that were made to the 2020 NEC. The 2020 edition adds fewer new articles than most of the other recent editions. For 2020, there are 3 brand new articles, as well as new Article 800 that kept some of the code language from Article 800 in the 2017 NEC and moved the rest to Article 805. The 4 new articles are Article 242, Overvoltage Protection, Article 311, Medium Voltage Conductors and Cable, Article 337, Type P Cable, Article 800, General Requirements for Communication Systems, with many of the codes that had been in Article 800 moved to Article 805, Communication Circuits. In addition to these new articles, there are some changes that had a wider impact on the NEC. For example, ever since the NEC introduced GFCIs in 1971 and saw an increase in safety for personnel and little struggle with reliability and availability, it's had a constant impact to the code. For the 2020 NEC, one of the code-making panels actively considered requiring GFCI protection for every outlet in a dwelling. That might happen at some point in the future, but instead, the code-making panel took out reference to amps and made it so all outlets 125 through 250 volts in the listed locations should be equipped with GFCI. That means a lot of washer and dryer outlets will now need GFCI protection. The code-making panel also made GFCI requirements in dwelling and non-dwelling settings more alike and extended GFCI requirements from occupied parts of a basement to the entire basement. One area that drew a lot of attention was GFCI protection in marinas and boatyards. The 2017 NEC had added a requirement for GFCI protection not to exceed 30 milliamps for all overcurrent protective devices supplying marinas and boatyards. By applying the requirement to every branch circuit, feeder, and service overcurrent protector, the GFCI could trip whenever more than a few boats came to a dock and plugged into onshore power outlets. The 2020 NEC addresses the problem by keeping the same 30 milliamp limit for direct hookups to boats, but creating a higher limit for feeders. Another change that will have a significant impact is one that was long overdue. It is now required to have a readily identified emergency disconnect for dwellings on the outside of the structure. With this change, now firefighters and electric utility workers and first responders will now have the ability to open all sources outside the structure, which will clearly make their job safer. Some states already had this requirement, but now the NEC makes it uniform for all states where the 2020 NEC is adopted. Another change at the service location is a reduction of the number of disconnects permitted and a requirement for surge protection for all residential installations. The 2020 NEC also makes some significant changes in the subject of load calculations. Load calculations have remained the same even though energy-efficient lights and other devices and equipment have become common. This edition of the NEC responds by decreasing numerous load calculation factors. Some of the changes to the 2017 NEC have been reconsidered or refined for the 2020 NEC. For example, the expanded codes for reconditioned equipment are being further modified to require testing in many circumstances. The 2017 NEC also changed how to calculate minimum required outlets for kitchen islands and peninsular countertops. Designers have been putting in more islands and longer peninsular counters, and yet the NEC continued to only require a single outlet. After the 2017 NEC upped the requirement, the 2020 edition took a second look and specified exactly how many outlets would be needed. One of the biggest changes in the 2017 NEC set broader and more well-defined requirements to label available fault current. The 2020 NEC revisits this issue and extends the requirements for available fault current marking even further. Like I mentioned at the beginning, these are just a few key changes that continue to increase safety and also address changes in technology that will likely impact many of us. We'll definitely look closer at each of them and many more as we dive into the chapter lessons that house them. Before looking at changes to individual code sections, we'll address the changes that have a wider impact on the NEC.